Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for coming today. It's our honor and pleasure to be hosting this event today, both with Sylwia Spurek and Ania Plomien as our academic chair. So I will just briefly go over what the event will be about, and I'll hand it over to Ania. So the event today will be on the current protests and women's rights issues in Poland, and we will be having Sylwia Spurek as our speaker, and Ania will give a more formal introduction to her in just a second. It's our honor to have you here today. It's a collaboration between the European Society of the LSE as well as the Polish Business Society. And yes, thank you very much for coming. And again, it's our honor to have you all here today. So I'll hand it over to Ania.
Okay, thank you, Carolina. So welcome everybody to this online event, which Carolina already mentioned, organized by the LSE, two societies, European Society and the Polish Business Society. And we are focusing our conversation today on the ongoing, quite spectacular women's and civil rights demonstrations in Poland that have been ongoing for quite a few weeks already under very restrictive conditions. We will be having this conversation with our guest from the European Parliament, the Polish member of the European Parliament, Dr. Sylwia Spurek. I will first run through some of the logistics of this event, and then I will introduce Sylwia Spurek to everybody present. We will have first, after this brief info, an intervention, a talk by Dr. Sylwia Spurek, which will be about 20 minutes or so, 20 to 30 minutes. After that, I will ask with some follow-up questions just to get the conversation started. And we will open this discussion to you as well, to questions from the audience. And so if you do have a question, please type it into the chat and I will try and attend to your questions after we have our brief conversation. I'll try to do it both chronologically and in terms of how comprehensive the question is. So try to be precise and try to be clear in what it is that you are asking of our speaker today. Another thing to mention is that it is an event which is recorded and it will be made available by the European Society on their WhatsApp group and I think on a YouTube channel as well. So let me just move on to introducing our speaker this evening. It is my real pleasure to chair this event and the talk by Dr. Sylwia Spurek, who is a member of the European Parliament, and she is the Vice Chair of the Committee on Women's Rights and Gender Equality of the European Parliament. Now, Dr. Spurek is a Polish politician and has a long career in civil service as a lawyer, but also has a career as an academic as well. And she has specialized in criminal, administrative, international, and constitutional law, as well as her doctorate focused on domestic violence. So issues that are very relevant to what we will be talking about today. I think both her academic and the legal background, as well as her civil service that she has served in Poland for a number of years, will come really handy in debating and discussing some of the issues that are arising from the events unfolding in Poland. I will just highlight a couple of work that Dr. Spurek was engaged in. One of them really important and pertinent is she has worked in the Office of the Government Plenipotentiary for Equal Status of Women and Men in Poland. She has also worked with the European Court of Human Rights, representing the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And very importantly, she also was a deputy at the Office of the Polish Ombuds for Equal Treatment for several years. And that work I have followed as well was quite impressive to engage and bring to the fore the question of women's rights. Dr. Spurek was elected to the European Parliament in 2019. and she has been in this space and mode of activity very supportive of not only what's going on with regards to civil and women's rights in Poland, but also in the European context. So please, let's just welcome Dr. Spurek warmly to this event and give her the floor. And thank you for coming to see us tonight.
Good evening to everybody, and thank you very much for inviting me for this meeting, and thank you for such a warm welcome, and to all of you for being here. I'm really honored that so many people, mostly women, I think, would like to listen to my speech and ask me some questions. I cannot agree with anything Ania said. Everything is correct. And a few things that I would like to tell you within this introduction is some things about me, obviously. I entered politics in March 2019, and probably because of it, I still consider myself as an expert instead of being a politician. And this way I try to act as an expert, using expertise and knowledge of my colleagues, of activists, of NGOs, of experts of different areas. And probably this way I differ from other politicians. I entered politics because I wanted to be more efficient. As Ania said, I played different roles in my professional life, but all these roles were connected with human rights, women's rights in particular. I was an activist, a lawyer in NGOs, dealing with the issues of domestic violence and sexual violence that was experienced by women. I was a legislator in public offices, drafting laws concerning women's rights, anti-discrimination laws, the first law on counteracting of domestic violence in 2003 in Poland. I was an academic for many years, and my PhD thesis focused on the isolation of perpetrator of domestic violence from the victim, because as you can imagine, as you know, the safety in such cases is one of the most important things. And then I was a Deputy Commissioner for Human Rights. I think I was the first and the only one, the last one, feminist in this office, in such a function of Deputy Commissioner for Human Rights. And I was responsible for equal treatment issues, women's rights, but also LGBTI rights, people with disabilities rights, including the right to independent life, elderly people, migrant and Roma people, hate speech. So and of course this time was demanding, because in 2015, as you know, PIS, Law and Justice Party, won for the first time the elections and started to rule Poland. And it was the first time, the first years of PIS in Poland. These days are the the third time PIS is governing party in Poland, and Professor Adam Bodnar, who is still a commissioner, Polish commissioner for human rights, tried obviously to tackle all those issues concerning rule of law, independence of judiciary, media freedom, freedom of assembly, but also constant attacks on LGBTI people rights, constant attacks on refugees and migrants, because in 2015, as you remember, the migration crisis started, and for the first time we observe hate speech in a very large extent addressed to migrants and refugees from the side of PIS, from the side of Law and Justice Party. And now, as you probably know, Professor Bodnar was supposed to finish his term, but we have another crisis because Law and Justice Party doesn't want to appoint another ombudsman. They don't have a proper candidate, and one candidate supported by over 1,000 NGOs is not supported by ruling party. So we have a situation when Professor Adam Bodnar, Polish commissioner, is still on his office, but he's not supposed to be from September. From all these roles, I try to be efficient. I monitor the situation. I do all this. I did all this advocacy work, lobbying. I prepared recommendations, interventions, reports and analysis. As for example, Deputy Commissioner for Human Rights, I sent a lot of letters to ministers, to Prime Minister, to all these Polish authorities to make them change the law or change the practice of the law. And mostly nothing happened. My recommendations, my reports were not be used by these authorities. So I decided to enter politics, and in May 2018 I won my first elections to the European Parliament, and I was a member of LIBE committee and a substitute member of Agri and Envy. And now, after my transfer to the Greens in the European Parliament, I'm still in LIBE, but I'm a substitute member, and I'm in FAM committee, so the committee on women's rights and gender equality, and I'm a deputy vice chair of this committee. The last thing I want to say is that I've been dealing with violence against women for 21 years, and now I can say that we can observe systemic violence from the side of the state against women because of this decision of so-called Constitutional Court in Poland. And I think we need to deal with such situation because of the negligence of all previous governments and parliaments in Poland. unfortunately, because this is not just the result of what Law and Justice Party did recent years in Poland. And probably, as Ania knows and remembers, I have 3 slogans, let's say, that are the most controversial ones, but I think I need to say it. I need to say them because now my voice as a MEP is stronger. But I know that are very controversial for some of the people, especially men, and these are violence has a gender. This is the first one. The second one is abortion is okay, and it concerns obviously the recent situations. And the third one is there's no true, real feminism without veganism. So I'm at your disposal. Please ask me questions. Again, thank you very much for inviting me here. And I'm really looking forward for your questions. Thank you.
Great, lovely, thank you. So as I will start posing some questions to you, anybody who is already thinking of asking something, please type it up and it will hopefully not disappear in the chat space. So with these credentials, Sylwia, and your experience, I really could not think of a better person to talk to us today about what's going on in Poland today, about the demonstrations that took hold of the streets and perhaps even the hearts and minds of Polish people. So could you, from your perspective, from the perspective of your experience as a lawyer, as an activist in Poland, and now as a politician in the European Union, in the European Parliament, what is this protest about? And is it about women's rights to abortion, or is there more that's going on?
I think this is very important questions because even some of the demonstrators and organizers had recently such thoughts about what this is about, this protests started because of this decision of so-called Constitutional Tribunal. As you know, Poland has a very restrictive anti-abortion law adopted in 1993. And a woman can conduct termination of pregnancy only in 3 cases, 3 situations. And one of them was questioned by Constitutional Tribunal in October, and this one was actually a basis of the majority of terminations of pregnancy last years. It was like 80-something% of all all abortions were conducted because of the sickness of the fetus, and obviously this decision resulted in such protests. A lot of people went to the streets, and it was very spontaneous at the beginning. And in the middle of this protests, in November, I think, some people started to say that these protests are not about abortion, but there are protests against ruling party, just as simple as that. And it was unfair because all this, many of these women who started this protest had this one idea: my body, my choice, and I cannot agree that politicians would decide about my life and health. You need to know that we in Poland, we are in a very strange situation as far as public debate on abortion is, because during this almost 30 years after adoption of this anti-abortion law, there was no real substantial debate on women's rights to abortion. And even very progressive liberal politicians and journalists started to use these phrases like unborn child and murder of a child. And there was this stories that this is the hardest decision a woman needs to make in her life, and so on. And that's why I'm saying abortion is okay, because all women that had abortion thought about termination of their pregnancy, are planning abortion right now, need to hear from us: abortion is okay. It's okay for you. It's okay if you decide to terminate your pregnancy. It's not a murder. It's not a tragedy. You don't need to feel guilty. You don't need to feel ashamed. Abortion is okay. But such a slogan is very controversial in Poland. And even women who had abortion don't openly talk about it. And we are in this strange situation that some people still think that these protests are about the right of a woman to have abortion, but some people started to think this is about the rule of law and the current ruling party, and the protests are just against PIS, the Law and Justice Party. And even if when we talk about people who are on the streets because it's about abortion and the right, the woman right to have abortion, some of them say about this so-called abortion compromise, and this name, this title, is about anti-abortion law adopted in 1993. So some people think this was a compromise, and this was a good compromise, and we just need to go back to this status, to this compromise. But it wasn't a compromise conducted between women and politicians. It was a compromise conducted between agreement between politicians and Catholic Church. So many of us think it's not fair to call it compromise, abortion compromise, and a lot of us think it's not fair to have this protest against ruling party. it should be a protest about abortion and about substantial and good debate about how to make Poland friendly for women, and just to leave us our choices, our decisions, but answering your question, Anya, I don't really know what the protests right now are about. Maybe both, maybe the rule of law and ruling party and abortion, anti-abortion law. But they started as protests against violations of women's rights, and they should be like this.
Thank you. Yes, that was great because you have, with your answer, also clarified what you meant by the negligence of previous governments, that abortion is not just something that concerns the current government, but the whole 30-year history that we have had with this contentious issue. Another interesting thing that you raised was the power of discourse, how powerful discourse is in who and what you name the problem to be. And I recently listened to a talk about constitutional changes in Germany in relation to abortion, where in 1970s, the laws were much more progressive than they are now. And part of the problem currently is in naming or in constructing the pregnant woman as a mother rather than as a woman or a pregnant woman. And therefore, these language issues really exemplify who is fighting for what and how difficult it is to make certain inroads. And so you already quite nicely elaborated about this abortion not being a new issue for contestation in Poland. In 2016, just a few years ago, we had another similar attempt by the same ruling country and party to introduce restrictions. And then too, women spilled on the streets in the czarny protest or black protest, waving umbrellas because it was raining, as well as coat hangers to symbolize the underground abortions that take place. That time, the government retreated in its controversial attempts, and it was a shorter, quite powerful, but shorter and less widespread event then than it is now. So this time seems to be different. Would you be able to tell us a little bit more about what's going on today, how it's different, and why this time may be different?
Probably there are two things, one formal one, and the second one concerning the attitudes and the goals of the protesters. The first one concerns legal issues, because, as you know, this decision of so-called constitutional tribunal cannot be questioned. It is valid as such. You cannot claim and, for example, go to the European Court for Human Rights or to another court or tribunal to question this decision. Of course, we have legal issues right now because government has not decided to publish this decision yet. That's why this decision is not binding yet, but it could be published anytime. We don't know what is going on actually right now. And and it's not published, maybe because of the scale of the protests, but it's hard to say. And you know, where you hear, when you hear about the plans of some laws or policies, you can organize protests, and this protest of 2016 was really successful. And as you said, the ruling party withdraw from its plans. But right now we have to deal with the decision of the functioning constitutional tribunal, even if we have some doubts and there are controversies about its legitimacy. It's still constitutional tribunal of the Republic of Poland. And the constitutional tribunal ruled, and we have to deal with it. So the first thing is this legal issues, but the second thing is I think the goals and attitudes of protesters. Marta Lempart and other leaders of women's strike prepared a list of issues, of problems to be solved, including some issues concerning this government. This government should be dismissed according to the list of issues. And I don't know how it ends, but there are more and more cities that organize the protests. There are more and more plans to organize protests in these big cities in Poland, including Warsaw. And of course, my fingers are crossed. But at the same time, I'm really sorry because it's winter in Poland, and many of these people have been on the streets for many years. They organized protests against violations of independence of judiciary in 2015 and 16, violations of freedom of media, office of prosecutors, civil servants, violations of LGBTI people rights, and they are still on the streets. And they must be sick and tired of the situation. They don't have their private and family lives. They sacrifice a lot in terms of their professional lives, especially those people who live in small cities and towns. They lose their jobs. They need to pay some financial sanctions because of the protests, and I wish they could protest. I wish the protest could last as long as we need the protests in Poland. But we need to understand the people on the streets, and they just need to rest. And that's why I think such international support as this recent European Parliament resolution on abortion ban in Poland are needed, because we need to show from many sides to those protesters that they are not alone, that we can see them, we can feel them, we can feel their suffering and their anger, and this resolution was about the solidarity, was about the support for the protesters, and was about appealing to current government and ruling party in Poland to stop this absurd. So I don't know, as I said, how it ends, but wish the protesters all the best, especially that we have this pandemic time, and I just, you know, I have this dream that the situation is different and these people could really live happily ever after, and we have this all human rights respected in Poland, but we don't.
Okay, well, I have two more questions before I'll open it up to the floor. One is linking to your happily ever after wish. Yesterday, I was at a talk by a professor from Morocco, Fatima Siddiqui, and she talked about the recent decade of how successful women's movements and women's organizing in Morocco has been in the last 10 years. And there it seems that women from both the secular movements as well as the Islamic movements were able to coalesce on a number of different issues that were previously divisive in getting them onto the political agenda and work cross borders that divide their ideological differences. It was about language rights, sexual harassment, land rights, and even rape-related abortion. So Islamist versus secular feminists or women have come to agree on a number of these issues. Do you see any coalition building in Poland, either in relation to abortion issues or any potential for different NGOs, women's organizations, or independent activists and groups coalescing around issues to work out an agenda that's more powerful that has been so far possible in Poland?
I wish I could, and I wish I could answer your question, yes. You know, once we had a prime minister in Poland who announced that Poland was a green island and preferred to build stadiums and football fields instead of investing in education and healthcare sector. And I think this is the problem. We don't have a strong civil society. We don't have strong NGOs independent from public funds. We don't have, and this is actually the origin, we don't have civic education. The school doesn't teach about human rights, about equality, about respect and dignity. And that's why we can say that the protests are really huge, but it's not about millions of Polish people. It's about thousands. What about the rest? If the civil society is not strong and is divided, because they all need to compete in terms of the money, There are no a real and organized coalitions, networks. Of course, these times all the organizations try to cooperate, try to organize the protests together, try to be together to prepare, to draft the recommendations together. But we have this, we have such situation in terms of NGOs and civil society sector in Poland, and at the same time there are politicians who don't support civil society, don't support what civil society and protesters say. There are liberal or even left-wing politicians that say, let's organize a referendum on abortion rights. And they totally don't understand that fundamental human rights should not be a subject of a referendum. They just exist. And especially in such situation when the ruling party, Law and Justice Party, has public media, now even some private media are owned by Law and Justice Party indirectly, when there are no independent agencies, authorities, institutions in Poland, but the Commissioner for Human Rights, organizing the referendum in such situation is like asking ourselves for a catastrophe. But you know, for example, Aleksander Kwaśniewski, who was a left-wing president of the Republic of Poland, recommended openly to organize a referendum of abortion, of the right of abortion. So on one hand, there are no strong NGOs and civil society, and on the other hand, even the civil society who really tries to do its best is not supported by liberal and left-wing politicians who actually do some harm instead of support. So we lose many years in terms of civic education, and the lack of civic education and the support for building strong civil society resulted right now in such situation. And of course, we have quite good laws in terms of sexual harassment at work, rape in criminal code, domestic violence, including the isolation of the perpetrator. But the practice is really poor. But this quite good, sufficient laws, I think, make us silent for many years. And now, not many people, not many women have this determination, time and energy and health to engage in building something, in protesting, but also in building something new. And I'm a lawyer, I'm not an expert expert of civil society, and probably there are some strategies how to change this situation. But from my point of view, people in Poland are really tired of this constant protesting, and it would be really hard to convince them to engage more, because you know it's physically impossible.
Great, thank you. You've made it very clear of having good laws is important, but there is limits to having good laws. It's the necessary but not sufficient condition when it comes to realizing substantive rights. I think I'll move to the question first from our audience, and then if there is still more time, pose you some more of my own questions. But I have a question from an MSc student in gender development and globalization in the Department of Gender Studies. And Helena is asking about the issue of this current issue of abortion and the European Parliament's resolution to support the issue. How has it evolved within the institution, and to what extent will these EU actions matter? Is it just a symbolic gesture, or is it something that can be more effective? So that's first part of the question. And the second question is, which you also framed, the difficult COVID conditions. We in the UK and in Europe, really in the EU, are also living with this big Brexit problem. So does this importance of what's going on in Poland in the abortion issue get diluted also by these big events? So two-part question: how is it working within the EU institutions, and does it matter in view of Brexit and COVID-19?
Yes, these are very important questions, and I hope the European Parliament resolution on abortion ban in Poland is not just a symbolic gesture. Although, as a lawyer, I need to say that the European Parliament resolutions are not the sources of the law from the formal point of view. But for me, also as a lawyer, this resolution could be a beginning of a debate what the European Union is, what the competences of European Union are, because you know, the European Union was designed as an economic organization, and the first laws concerning equality between men and women were drafted because of the salaries, the difference in the salaries of women and men, and the companies who hired more women were in better situation because they needed to pay women less. So they have more money for development and so on. But from 1 year to another, in my opinion, the European Union started to be more organization based less on the economy and this all common goals concerning economy, but more about people and their rights. But still, more discussions are conducted on highways, common agricultural policies, taxes, than on fundamental rights. I think this resolution can show us that we need a debate and maybe the changes in the treaties concerning the competences of the EU in terms of, for example, healthcare. Which means also reproductive health of women, which means also abortion, because abortion is just a healthcare, one of the healthcare services, and it should be treated like this. So this that's why I think it's not just a symbol, it's not a symbolic gesture only, but also a starting point to discuss how we can see the European Union. Because if we still focus on highways and agriculture and transportation, the European Union will start to die. Maybe it's a big word, but I think we need to decide, and this is the time to decide what should be the main goal of the European Union. Because without fundamental human rights, there is no place for the European Union. And fundamental human rights should be the basis of our community. So I think I combined the answers for these two questions this way, but I think that we are the discussions are dominated by all these issues concerning also Brexit and all these serious problems instead of real serious problems like women's rights and LGBTI rights and people with disabilities rights, all these minorities and women who were left behind, as Hillary Clinton said. And I'm really sad that the majority of politicians can see the European Union as such, because it's not there's no future for such European Union, in my opinion.
Okay, I also have a question here from Julia, who is asking whether you have any ideas about how these protests could be actively supported from outside of Poland by non-Polish citizens. And the question is complicated by the idea or the problem of religiosity and how sensitive and sensible should we be, having in mind that there are religious feelings involved as well, and how to respectfully perhaps support the protest, bearing this in mind, and whether petitions work, whether there's something else that people from outside could do in solidarity with the protests in Poland.
I think we would need more time if we would like to go through these religious aspects of this debate, because of course all of this started from one religion in Poland, but in my opinion, all actions are really crucial from outside Poland as well. Petitions, letters, supports, Facebook actions, gathering, collecting some signatures, some I don't know, the actions with some slogan on the papers. Everything matters, really, and I'm saying this not as a politician, but mostly as a woman who have very different experiences with a range of violations of women's rights, and people in Poland really appreciate such actions, such support. Really, I think it really makes sense to do anything and everything, and we can talk about petitions to Polish authorities, because of course maybe it would be useless, unsuccessful, but it matters. We can talk about letters and petitions to the European Commission, because I don't know if you know, but 70% of the law that is binding in Poland was adopted by the European Parliament. So I think we sometimes we forget how much of our system is created by European Union authorities, and if we could change the treaties and make the European Union deal with fundamental rights more than highways, it could really matters. It could really matter in different member states. So yes, please prepare petitions and everything you can think of, because it matters. It matters mostly for those people who are on the streets right now.
Great, thank you for that. We still have about 15 minutes or so of the time that we have with you, Sylwia. I have a question here from Didier, but anybody else who is interested in posing a question, here is your chance. Just type it into the chat. Didier is studying MSc Human Rights and Politics at the LSE, and is asking about a question, an issue that you already talked a little bit about. He's asking whether women's rights and LGBT rights relate, and whether women's and LGBTQ groups, organizations collaborate on these issues.
Yeah. I'm smiling because this is totally direct correlation. And, when I started to coordinate a process of ratification of Istanbul Convention by Poland, this is this huge international document concerning counteracting violence against women and domestic violence, created by the Council of Europe, and it was 2014 in Poland, and the first attack on the Istanbul Convention was about so-called gender ideology, and still I feel very uncomfortable explaining this phrase, because it's really impossible to explain what gender ideology means. But shortly speaking, that time it meant abortion, and same-sex marriages. Same-sex marriages. So the right-wing organizations tried to show Istanbul Convention as a document who provide all women with abortions, no matter they want it or not, and all people, especially LGBTI people, with the right to get married. It was also about recognition of gender. And one of the senators explaining the need to vote against the ratification of the convention said on one of the Senate sittings, it's about the changes of the sex. You can change from, and this is a quote, female to male, and from male to female. She was reading something from the paper, and it was from female to male, and from male to female, and so on. So the discussion about women's rights and LGBTI people rights is really similar in Poland, and I think the rights of women and the rights of LGBTI people are so controversial, similarly to some people, that they connect these discussions, and because, you know, for some people in Poland, it's very controversial if a woman have a right to decide whether to be pregnant or not, whether to have a job or not, what to study, whether to leave their home city, her home city or not. And some people still think that this is a role of men to have a power and control over a wife and children, and all these discussions about women's rights, that's why, are so controversial for those people, especially men, LGBTI plus people rights are even more controversial, because the normal standard relation for many people in Poland is a relation of a woman and a man that in the future get married and will have children. This is reality of many people in Poland, the reality that they want to be the reality of all people in the whole world. And they cannot agree that other people have the right to be happy, to live according to their values, to their rules. And this attacks on women and LGBTI persons are really strongly connected, even on just because they are conducted very often by the same people, the same right-wing politicians, the same right-wing journalists, the same right-wing opinion makers. And LGBTI plus people are the minority, women just the opposite. But women in Poland and in many other countries still are still treated as a minority because of the extent of the rights they could not fully enjoy. So yeah, so maybe not shortly speaking, but yes, unfortunately, women and gays and lesbians and transgender people and so on are attacked in the same way because of the same reasons, sometimes by the same persons.
Okay, well, thank you. Quite an entanglement of issues and forces working against realization of rights. I have a question that was typed in a message by Magda Mutter, who is a PhD student in the Department of Gender Studies. And she really is asking you to pull out your crystal ball and to you already mentioned it. It's difficult to know what will happen with the protests and with the reactions and whether the ruling will be published or not, or what is holding back us between now and the moment that it might be published. But we're going to have this government for the next 3 years. Could you think, from your perspective, your legal perspective, as well as the member of the European Parliament, what are the ramifications, or what are the best case or worst case scenarios of what may happen, what may reasonably happen over the next few years in terms of a reasoned expert prediction of the future?
You know, I have this reflection that in 2019 we didn't predict a lot of things that happened in 2019 and right now, and we couldn't think that it could be worse, but it is. And I'm afraid to think about the worst scenarios, but I can imagine that PIS party appoints right-wing radical for the function of Commissioner for Human Rights in Poland, because they need to appoint somebody. Professor Adam Bodnar could not be the commissioner forever, and he doesn't want to be this forever commissioner for human rights. And I can imagine that the so-called constitutional tribunal is ruling about Istanbul Convention, because, as you know, there is government application to address to Constitutional Tribunal concerning some regulations of Istanbul Convention, and probably this so-called Constitutional Tribunal would question these regulations. And I can imagine that that Polish government withdraws the Istanbul Convention at all. I can imagine that they amend a lot of laws concerning domestic violence, anti-discrimination laws, binding in the area of employment, that they could, for example, limit the possibility to get divorce. that they could adopt the law that makes women stay at home and prevent women from work indirectly, obviously. I can imagine the abolition of whole anti-abortion law and deleted the possibilities of termination of pregnancy at all in all the cases. In the case of if the pregnancy is a result of criminal offense, and the case if the pregnancy threats the health or life of a woman. I can imagine a lot of things, and I'm really afraid of speaking about them. And the good scenario is we have elections, parliamentary elections in Poland next year in spring, and the opposition wins the election, and there is a huge coalition of the opposition parties, NGOs, activists, and they just start a new Polish deal concerning also women's rights and LGBTI rights, climate catastrophe, the rule of law, and everything. It's like I had a dream, but I hope that some of these things are possible, but without the support, international support, but also the support from the side of Polish people who now are just neutral, we cannot make it.
Well, thank you for this positive note as we end this conversation. We need this positive note very much. Should we work towards this through feminism with veganism?
Well, I can always say in every discussion, it's short, just go vegan. But being serious, if you think seriously about fighting climate catastrophe, it's not, there's no way without veganism. And I'm not going to elaborate more on it. You can find, all you guys, you can find data and information on the internet about it. But of course, I'm vegan because of animal rights, and I'm just vegan for life. But of course, if the arguments concerning climate catastrophe are more important for you, and as you know, I deal with these two priorities, women's rights, human rights, and climate and animal rights. Just do this because it's good for our planet. So that's it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sylwia, and just virtual and in-person sort of claps for your participation, your insight, and your inspiration of how to move from today towards tomorrow. Perhaps Caroline and Ida, you'd like to mention of how this should be wrapped up?
Yes, of course. So thank you very much. As a feminist and a vegan myself, I very much echo those words, and thank you for the positive note. I think I speak on behalf of everyone who's attended that this has been very insightful, and we appreciate you having taken the time to be here today. And thank you, Dr. Plomien, for also taking the time and being an excellent chair of this event. Exactly. So thank you very much. And the recording will be uploaded on our YouTube channel. So if you want to rewatch this insight and maybe write down some notes and some words of inspiration, you can just check out our YouTube channel. Exactly. So thank you very much and have a nice evening or morning or afternoon wherever you are in the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much again, and it was my honor and pleasure to meet you all. And I'm at your full disposal if you would like to meet me again, because what motivates me is just such meetings and discussions. And thank you very much for all your questions and comments. And I hope to see you in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you and good luck.
Yes, good luck.